Curiosity is the spark that drives progress. It's the reason humans discovered fire, invented tools, and eventually mapped the world. But for our earliest ancestors, curiosity was often lethal. Their world didn't reward bold experimentation the way ours does today. It punished it, swiftly, silently, and without warning. Long before formal tools or written instructions, humans had only instinct and trial and error to guide them. Every discovery required touching, tasting, or testing something unknown. Some experiments ended in advancement, others ended in death. And often the line between success and failure was razor thin. Consider food. Early humans had no guidebooks. They didn't know which plants were safe, which roots contained poisons, or which mushrooms were deadly. One curious individual might nibble on a vibrant red berry simply because it smelled sweet or looked familiar. That bite could mean nothing. Or it could introduce cyanide precursors into the bloodstream, shutting down vital organs within hours. Across prehistoric landscapes, countless humans died because they trusted their instincts in a world that had no mercy. Curiosity about food was a daily gamble, and not everyone lived to see the payoff. Curiosity also extended to water and environmental exploration. Streams, rivers, and ponds were essential resources, yet even these basic necessities could be traps. Some prehistoric humans perished from undetectable pathogens lurking in water, picked up simply by experimenting with a new drinking source. Others, exploring unknown terrain, fell victim to sudden currents, hidden sinkholes, or unexpected predator ambushes. Their drive to explore, to understand, or to simply satisfy the urge to see what was around the next bend often put them in lethal danger. Then there was the realm of fire. Fire was revolutionary, but it was also dangerous beyond imagination. Early humans experimented with flames in enclosed caves, under thatched shelters, or too close to flammable materials. Curiosity drove them to test new ways to ignite and control fire, and sometimes those experiments went catastrophically wrong. Smoke inhalation, burns, and accidental cave fires claimed lives before anyone could even understand what had happened. Their eagerness to tame fire was both their salvation and a hidden executioner. Curiosity wasn't limited to objects and elements. Social experimentation could also be deadly. Early humans were social creatures, and learning hierarchy, cooperation, and territory boundaries was essential. Testing the limits of authority, encroaching on another tribe's hunting grounds, or misjudging social interactions could provoke violent retaliation. Some prehistoric deaths came not from nature, but from other humans, the very species they sought to understand and bond with. Curiosity about human behavior itself carried risk. Even play and tool experimentation could be lethal. A young hunter might test the strength of a spear or the range of a sling. They might follow animals too closely to understand their behavior, only to be trampled, gored, or ambushed. The same curiosity that led to innovation, better weapons, coordinated hunts, and smarter traps, also cost lives in ways that were unpredictable and immediate. The irony is sharp. The very trait that defines humanity, our relentless urge to explore, to probe, to understand, was also one of the leading causes of death. Without curiosity, humans would not have survived at all. With curiosity, many did not. It was a double-edged sword, exacting a toll on every generation. Each fatal mistake taught survivors something new, creating a slow, brutal ladder of progress. Every death was a lesson in what not to do, a warning whispered through time to the next person brave enough to wonder. Yet some deaths from curiosity were almost poetic in their absurdity. A person investigating a brightly colored fungus, thinking it might be edible, succumbs to liver failure. Another, daring to touch a seemingly harmless insect nest, finds themselves fatally stung. These deaths were sudden, unexpected, and sometimes strangely ironic, as if nature itself was teaching a lesson with dark humor. The same curiosity that killed early humans also laid the groundwork for survival. It led to fire control, tool creation, cooperative hunting, and eventually the first forms of communication. Each fatal misstep nudged humanity closer to understanding the world, and in that sense, curiosity was both a predator and a teacher. Without it, there would have been no science, no innovation, and no continuation of the human story. So while curiosity killed many, it also made the survivors smarter, faster, and more adaptable. Every bite tasted, every stone thrown, every fire tested, every boundary crossed, brought a small fraction of knowledge that could be passed down. Humanity survived because some were careful, some were lucky, and some died so that others could live. For prehistoric humans, eating wasn't just a necessity, it was a daily experiment. Every bite was a choice, every mouthful a potential risk. While today we glance at a fruit, or boil a root before tasting, early humans had no safety guides. Nature offered both sustenance and lethal traps in the same landscape, and often the line between life and death was invisible. Some of the deadliest threats were plants. Many roots, berries, and seeds contain toxins that are harmless when processed properly, but deadly when consumed raw. Cassava, for example, contains cyanogenic compounds that can release cyanide if not carefully soaked or cooked. A single miscalculation, a few hurried bites, and the digestive system became a battlefield. Symptoms could be delayed, allowing the victim to walk, talk, and eat again, all while poison silently shut down organs. Many prehistoric deaths went unnoticed in real time because the danger was invisible and the stomach was already full. But it wasn't only about chemical poisons. Nutritional imbalance was another silent killer. Some edible foods lacked essential vitamins, and early humans didn't know how to combine foods for proper nutrition. Deficiencies like scurvy, anemia, or protein shortages weakened the body slowly, leaving individuals vulnerable to infections and predators. In essence, they could be alive, yet functionally on a path toward death, their bodies betraying them long before the end arrived. Meat brought a separate set of risks. Raw or undercooked meat can harbor parasites, bacteria, and other pathogens. Trichinella from infected meat, tapeworms, and bacteria, like Salmonella or E. coli, could devastate a human system. One careless meal, eaten in the excitement of a fresh kill, could result in fever, organ failure, or prolonged suffering. Prehistoric humans didn't have antibiotics, so even minor digestive issues could spiral into fatal infections. Sometimes it was the most mundane foods that killed. Foraging for tubers or mushrooms, humans occasionally misidentified poisonous species as edible ones. The deathcap mushroom, for instance, is almost indistinguishable from edible varieties, but contains potent toxins that can destroy the liver and kidneys. Someone hungry and untrained could eat what seemed harmless, feeling fine at first, only to collapse and die. Days later, the irony was cruel. Survival instincts led them to eat, yet it was precisely that action that ended their life. Water, too, could betray them. Contaminated sources caused diarrhea, dehydration, and death, often within hours or days. Pathogens like Giardia or Cryptosporidium were invisible, silent assassins. Even the most cautious could fall victim if they experimented with a new stream or pond, and experimentation, as we've seen, was often necessary to find a reliable source. Eating errors were compounded by preparation mistakes, grinding grains or roots improperly. Storing food in damp conditions or failing to wash hands could introduce mold, bacteria, and toxins. Food poisoning, though rare in modern populations thanks to hygiene and refrigeration, was a frequent killer for early humans. A single spoiled meal could incapacitate an entire group, leaving them vulnerable to starvation or predators. But these deaths carried more than physical consequences. They were deeply emotional for the survivors. Witnessing a comrade, parent, or child die from a simple bite, a seemingly trivial misstep, was a stark reminder of how precarious life was. Full stomachs offered no guarantee, and those who watched could only carry the lesson forward: observe, test, and avoid what had killed another. Knowledge became survival, passed not in books but in stories, warnings, and cautious imitation. Ultimately, the lesson of digestive deaths is sobering. Survival was a balance of risk and caution, instinct and observation. Early humans ate because they had to, but every meal was a calculated gamble. The ones who lived learned to read nature carefully, to prepare and to respect the subtle dangers hidden in plain sight. But for many, a curious bite or a wrong choice was enough to make the stomach a coffin, reminding us that even when it seemed humans were thriving, death was never far behind, quietly, invisibly, and often while their bellies were full. Survival in prehistoric times was never a solitary endeavor. Humans were, from the very beginning, social creatures. Their strength wasn't just in muscle or speed, but in numbers, cooperation, and shared knowledge. But social bonds were fragile, and losing them could be just as deadly as any predator or disease. Social death, being abandoned, isolated, or exiled, often meant a slow, inescapable march toward actual death. Early human communities were tight-knit because they had to be. Hunting, gathering, and protection required teamwork. Every member had a role, whether it was scouting for food, tending fires, caring for children, or guarding against predators. The loss of a single member could weaken the group's efficiency, but the loss of one to the group, or the forced separation of an individual, could be fatal. Individuals left alone, even briefly, were exposed to dangers their tribe could buffer against: harsh weather, predators, lack of food, and psychological strain. Abandonment could occur for several reasons. Illness or injury often made a person unfit to travel or hunt. In a world where mobility was survival, a broken leg or a persistent sickness was not just personal misfortune. It was a threat to the group's survival. Early humans sometimes made the brutal decision to leave weaker members behind. Social death was not cruelty in the modern sense. It was a pragmatic, desperate act of survival. Those abandoned would face exposure, starvation, or predator attacks, with no one to intervene. Exile was another form of social death. Tribal conflicts, disputes over territory, mating rights, or leadership could result in individuals being forced away from the community. Alone, they faced all the hazards the tribe once helped them navigate. Isolation amplified every risk. A river crossing that might have been safe with others became deadly alone. A fire started incorrectly could be fatal, and even minor wounds without help could turn lethal through infection. Psychology played a role as well. Humans left alone experienced not just physical dangers, but intense stress and fear. Loneliness weakened decision-making and increased exposure to errors. Crossing dangerous terrain, misjudging predator behavior, or consuming toxic food out of desperation. Stress hormones like cortisol could spike, suppressing immunity and making illness more likely. In prehistoric terms, being alone was effectively signing one's death sentence. Even temporary separation carried risk. Scouts, hunters, or foragers could wander too far or too long from their main group. A sudden predator attack, an accident on rough terrain, or exposure to extreme weather could turn a routine excursion into fatal isolation. Some prehistoric deaths likely occurred far from the tribe, leaving no witnesses, making it difficult for archaeologists to distinguish these from other accidental fatalities. Yet every one of these deaths tells the same story. Survival relied not just on skill, but on the network of humans around you. Social death also had long-term consequences for the tribe itself. Losing a member meant losing knowledge of hunting grounds, food preparation, or medicinal plants. When early humans perished alone, it wasn't just the individual who died. Their experience, their learned skills, and sometimes even genetic contribution vanished. Communities had to constantly balance compassion, pragmatism, and survival instincts, navigating the fine line between helping the weak and ensuring the survival of the many. Interestingly, archaeology provides glimpses of this dynamic. Skeletal remains sometimes show evidence of healed injuries, suggesting some individuals were cared for despite severe wounds. But other remains show injuries that were likely fatal without care, hinting at abandonment. The message is clear. Social support could save a life, but social isolation made even minor dangers deadly. In the harsh prehistoric world, humans weren't just fighting nature. They were negotiating survival within their own species. Cooperation was essential, but social bonds could break under pressure, and the consequences were lethal. Those who survived did so not only because they were strong or clever, but because they were part of a network that offered protection, guidance, and shared knowledge. Those left outside that network rarely survived long enough to pass their story forward. Ultimately, social death underscores one of the most profound truths about early humans. No skill, no intelligence, no instinct could replace the safety and power of the tribe. Isolation was a silent predator, always waiting, and far more efficient than the largest carnivore or the deadliest toxin. To die alone was often to die quickly, to vanish without warning, and to become one of the countless unseen victims whose sacrifices allowed humanity to continue. Life in prehistoric times was precarious, and sometimes the deadliest threats weren't predators, disease, or starvation. They were accidents. Small missteps, overlooked hazards, or moments of bad luck claimed countless lives. These deaths were sudden, unpredictable, and often absurd, yet they remind us that survival required not just strength or cunning, but constant vigilance. Accidental deaths took many forms. A simple slip on wet rocks while foraging along a river could send a human tumbling into fast currents. Cliffs, steep hills, and uneven terrain pose daily hazards. Archaeological studies have found fossilized skeletons at the base of cliffs, with fractures suggesting fatal falls. One misstep, one poorly judged jump, and a life ended instantly. No predator needed. Even the act of hunting carried enormous risk. Following prey too closely or misjudging distance could result in trampling, goring, or being pinned by animals far larger than themselves. Tools, which were essential for survival, could become lethal in unskilled hands. Spears, axes, or stone blades were used for protection and food gathering, yet misthrows or mishandling sometimes turned these implements against the wielder. A fatal accident could happen during the simplest attempt to sharpen a tool or drag a carcass. Fire, though revolutionary, also caused accidental deaths. Misjudging smoke or embers, improperly stacking fuel, or leaving flammable material near sparks could ignite sudden fires. Early humans often lived in caves or makeshift shelters where escape routes were limited. Archaeologists have discovered cave floors charred in patterns indicating uncontrolled fires, suggesting that some deaths occurred while experimenting with fire, learning to control it the hard way. Some accidents were almost ironic in their simplicity. Falling rocks, unstable tree limbs, or even a misstep on uneven ground could kill without warning. Evidence from early hominin sites shows fractured skulls, crushed rib cages, and other injuries consistent with blunt force trauma from seemingly mundane causes. While predators get the headlines, it was often the environment itself that was the silent executioner. Water was another source of accidental death. Early humans crossed rivers for hunting or exploration, and sudden floods or unseen whirlpools could sweep a person away in seconds. Fossilized remains near ancient riverbeds indicate drowning as a surprisingly common cause of prehistoric fatalities. Streams that appeared calm could harbor hidden dangers, and without the knowledge of currents or swimming techniques, one wrong step was enough to end a life. Even insects and smaller creatures were lethal in rare cases. Bee stings, scorpion bites, or venomous spiders could trigger allergic reactions or infections. Modern scientists have theorized that anaphylaxis from insect stings likely killed prehistoric humans long before medicine existed. Simple curiosity, investigating a nest, reaching under a rock, or picking a flower, could have deadly consequences. Interestingly, some of these accidents leave traces that modern archaeology has captured. One discovery comes from a Neanderthal site in Shanidar Cave, Iraq, where skeletal remains show healed injuries consistent with falls or accidents. Another case comes from La Chapelle-aux-Saints in France, where fractures on a Neanderthal skeleton indicate blunt trauma, possibly from a collapsed structure or a large animal mishap. These discoveries give a glimpse into the everyday dangers our ancestors faced. Dangers that weren't glamorous, heroic, or spectacular, but fatal nonetheless. Accidental deaths also highlight the fragile relationship between early humans and their surroundings. A cliff edge, a river, a tree, all familiar, all seemingly harmless, could instantly become instruments of death. Life required constant awareness and rapid response, yet even the most alert could fall victim to randomness. Survival was not just skill, it was luck, timing, and sometimes sheer chance. Humor, in a dark sense, occasionally emerges in these stories. A human might perish trying to chase a bird for curiosity, or stumble over a log while carrying a freshly killed prey. While tragic, these deaths underline the unpredictable nature of prehistoric life. The world offered no reset button. A small lapse could become fatal. These accidents remind us that evolution is as much about learning from failure as it is about triumph. Each fatal misstep, though it ended a life, contributed to the collective knowledge of the group. Lessons were passed down: how to navigate terrain, how to handle tools safely, and how to respect unseen hazards. Survival depended not only on avoiding predators, but also on understanding the unpredictable ways the environment itself could kill. While predators, accidents, and environmental hazards were obvious threats to prehistoric humans, the deadliest killers were often invisible. Tiny organisms, bacteria, parasites, and viruses, silently claimed lives that seemed healthy and strong on the surface. These microscopic enemies didn't roar, bite, or chase. They worked quietly, efficiently, and lethally. Even minor injuries could become death sentences. A small cut from a hunting tool, a thorn, or even a sharp rock could introduce bacteria into the bloodstream. Without antibiotics or knowledge of sanitation, a seemingly insignificant wound could develop into gangrene or septicemia. The victim might walk, talk, and eat for days while the infection silently spread, ultimately overwhelming their body. Parasites were another constant threat. Studies of coprolites, fossilized human feces, reveal that early humans were hosts to a variety of intestinal parasites, including hookworms, whipworms, and tapeworms. These parasites caused malnutrition, anemia, and general weakening of the body. For a population already living on the edge, these conditions could make the difference between surviving a harsh winter or succumbing to starvation. Even mild infestations would compromise immunity, making infections from minor wounds far more dangerous. One of the most striking pieces of evidence comes from the Oase cave in Romania, where the remains of early Homo sapiens revealed signs of multiple infections, including periodontal disease and evidence of parasitic infestations. Analysis suggested that some individuals carried chronic infections that would have caused fatigue, pain, and vulnerability to other fatal threats. In effect, they were living with silent killers inside their own bodies. Waterborne pathogens also contributed to invisible mortality. Giardia, Cryptosporidium, and other protozoans contaminated natural water sources, causing severe diarrhea, dehydration, and even death. Early humans had no way of purifying water, and experimentation with different sources, necessary to find enough to drink, often exposed them to lethal doses of these microorganisms. A single contaminated sip could incapacitate someone far from their tribe, turning isolation into certain death. Respiratory infections were equally devastating. Evidence from fossilized remains suggests that tuberculosis-like infections existed tens of thousands of years ago. Crowded shelters, exposure to smoke from fire, and close living quarters during cold months allowed airborne pathogens to spread easily. Pneumonia, influenza, and other respiratory illnesses could strike suddenly and without warning, often killing the very young, the elderly, or those weakened by malnutrition. Even lice and other external parasites posed significant challenges. While not immediately fatal, infestations caused itching, skin infections, and a constant drain on energy. Persistent irritation combined with malnutrition could subtly reduce an individual's strength and make them more susceptible to other threats. In a world where every ounce of energy counted, this could be the difference between life and death. Accidental injuries compounded by infections were particularly deadly. Archaeologists studying Krapina Cave in Croatia, a Neanderthal site, found skeletal remains showing signs of multiple healed and unhealed injuries, alongside evidence of chronic infection. These findings suggest that while Neanderthals could survive traumatic injuries for a time, the microscopic complications often ultimately killed them. The research emphasizes that invisible threats were just as critical as visible ones. Perhaps even more so, because they could strike unpredictably, silently eroding resilience. What's striking about microscopic killers is their indiscriminate nature. Strength, size, or agility mattered little against bacteria and parasites. A skilled hunter or a vigilant gatherer could fall victim to an infection contracted from a minor scratch or a contaminated meal. Unlike a predator attack, these deaths could be prolonged, agonizing, and often invisible to others, leaving survivors to witness or learn from the consequences without fully understanding the cause. In many ways, microscopic killers were the ultimate equalizer. They reminded early humans that survival depended not just on skill or awareness of the environment, but also on subtle, often invisible factors beyond immediate perception. Every infection, every parasite, every unseen pathogen reinforced the delicate balance between life and death, in a world where even small mistakes, a missed observation, a contaminated source, a minor wound, could prove fatal. While many prehistoric deaths were slow, drawn out, or the result of unseen threats, cold could be brutally immediate. For early humans, exposure to icy water or freezing temperatures wasn't just uncomfortable. It could kill in seconds. This phenomenon, known today as cold shock, demonstrates that survival wasn't only about avoiding predators or accidents. It was also about mastering the environment itself. Cold shock occurs when the body is suddenly submerged in icy water. The shock triggers an involuntary gasp reflex, hyperventilation, and a spike in heart rate. For humans without experience or preparation, this reflex can lead to drowning almost instantly. Imagine stepping into a shallow river to cross, misjudging its depth, or slipping on wet rocks. A single miscalculation and the body's own survival instincts betray it. Archaeological evidence from riverbeds in Europe and Asia shows early human remains in positions suggesting sudden immersion, hinting at deaths that likely occurred in moments rather than hours. Hypothermia added another lethal layer. Prolonged exposure to cold, even without water immersion, slowly sapped strength, impaired judgment, and ultimately led to organ failure. For a hunter, tracking prey, or a forager far from shelter, losing consciousness to cold was a death sentence. Unlike predators, the cold didn't chase. It waited patiently, silently, and invisibly, gradually overwhelming even the fittest individuals. Some prehistoric deaths from cold were startlingly ironic. Humans had mastered fire in many areas, yet even a small lapse, falling asleep while poorly insulated or miscalculating the warmth of a temporary shelter, could result in instant or near instant death. Rivers, lakes, or even snow-covered terrain became lethal traps. Archaeologists studying Ice Age sites, such as frozen steppe regions in Siberia, have found remains showing frostbite and fractures, indicating desperate struggles against extreme cold before death. Cold shock also reveals the fragility of early human physiology. Without modern clothing, insulated shelters, or advanced knowledge of survival techniques, even a brief encounter with freezing conditions could outmatch instincts honed for hunting, foraging, and avoiding predators. The human body simply wasn't equipped for sudden immersion or exposure without preparation, making the smallest environmental error potentially fatal. Even animals posed indirect cold-related threats. A fall while fleeing a predator into icy water, or slipping on frozen terrain, combined natural hazards with human vulnerability. Unlike disease or injury, cold shock left no dramatic traces in most cases. It was instantaneous, silent, and final. Cold shock deaths highlight a critical lesson. Survival wasn't just about strength, skill, or intelligence. It was about understanding, respecting, and navigating environmental forces that could kill faster than any predator. These invisible but immediate killers claimed lives that might otherwise have seemed secure, leaving only skeletal evidence of their fleeting existence. In the prehistoric world, death could be instantaneous, and the cold was one of its most efficient agents. It reminded humans that nature's power was absolute, and that even the smallest misstep, a slip, a misjudged step, or a careless river crossing, could erase an entire lifetime in seconds. Survival required awareness, caution, and sometimes sheer luck. Fire was the greatest gift early humans ever discovered. It provided warmth, protection, and the ability to cook food, fundamentally changing the trajectory of human survival. Yet this same element, so essential for life, could also become a silent killer. Prehistoric humans, curious and inventive, often underestimated fire's dangers, and in the enclosed spaces of caves or shelters, smoke and carbon monoxide turned life-giving flames into lethal traps. Unlike predators or freezing rivers, fire didn't leave visible traces on every victim. Its danger was subtle and pervasive. Smoke inhalation, often invisible until it was too late, could suffocate individuals without warning. Carbon monoxide, produced when fire burns in poorly ventilated spaces, is odorless and colorless. Early humans had no concept of this invisible killer. They could sit for hours tending a fire, inhaling the toxic gas, their bodies slowly weakening while survival instincts failed to alert them. In some cases, sudden deaths may have been caused by accidental overexposure to carbon monoxide or smoke inhalation, a hazard as deadly as any predator lurking outside. Accidental burns were another risk. Sparks, open flames, and careless handling of firewood could ignite clothing, bedding, or nearby structures. In small enclosed shelters, flames could spread rapidly, leaving no time for escape. Even a skilled fire user could make a fatal mistake while trying to cook, keep warm, or experiment with new ways to control the flames. Archaeologists have found charred bones and ash layers in cave floors, suggesting that some individuals died while managing the very element that allowed their survival. Cooking was revolutionary but risky. Boiling water or roasting meat in open fires produced heat, steam, and smoke, all of which could cause burns or respiratory distress. Children and unskilled members of the group were particularly vulnerable, often suffering accidental injuries while learning fire safety. Tragically, in the absence of modern firefighting methods, even minor errors could become fatal. The irony is stark. Fire, which saved lives by keeping predators at bay, extending daylight and cooking food, also claimed lives silently. Carbon monoxide poisoning could mimic fatigue or sickness at first. A person might sit quietly in a smoke-filled cave, feeling slightly dizzy or lethargic until unconsciousness struck. Unlike a predator attack, these deaths were quiet, invisible, and sometimes collective. Whole groups could be affected if the air became saturated with toxic fumes. Fire-related accidents also illustrate the tension between curiosity and survival. Early humans constantly experimented with flames, how to start them, how to sustain them, and how to manipulate them for warmth, light, or cooking. Each experiment carried risk. Even the smartest, most cautious individual could fall victim to a spark in the wrong place or smoke in the wrong direction. Learning fire's limits was a process written in blood, literally, and often silently chronicled in cave remains. In essence, fire was both a tool and a predator. Its benefits were indispensable, yet the threat was omnipresent. Smoke inhalation, carbon monoxide poisoning, and accidental burns made fire an invisible but persistent killer. Understanding this duality is essential to appreciating prehistoric life. Survival required mastery of the environment, but mastery itself could backfire spectacularly. Every hearth and every flame carried potential. Fire gave warmth and protection, but it also taught one of humanity's earliest lessons. The most powerful tools could also be the deadliest. Prehistoric humans lived with this tension daily, balancing the need to control fire with the constant risk that it might control them instead. Looking back at the lives of those who walked the earth tens of thousands of years ago, it's impossible not to feel the fragility of existence. Every step, every choice, every breath was a wager against a world that offered no guarantees. Predators lurked, elements raged, unseen pathogens attacked, and even curiosity could be fatal. Life was not just difficult, it was unpredictable, brutal, and often absurd. And yet, humans endured. Despite every misstep, every mistake, and every accident, the species survived. Each fatal error, whether from curiosity, digestion, social exile, accidental mishap, microscopic threat, cold, fire, the sky, or relentless heat, carried lessons. Some lessons were learned through observation, others painfully firsthand. Each tragedy taught the survivors how to eat safely, avoid hidden dangers, navigate the environment, and care for one another. Humanity's knowledge was written in the scars of those who did not survive. There's a paradox in these stories. The very same traits that exposed humans to death, curiosity, exploration, experimentation, were the traits that allowed the species to persist. They tested, they stumbled, and sometimes they fell, but in doing so they built the foundations of survival, innovation, and resilience. The mistakes were fatal, yes, but they were also the architects of knowledge. It's sobering to realize how often survival was a matter of luck, timing, and being part of a community. Those left alone or misjudging a single hazard often vanished without a trace, leaving only skeletal whispers of lives abruptly ended. But those who survived did so because they adapted, shared knowledge, and learned from both their own errors and the errors of others. Each life lost carried forward lessons that became embedded in the culture, in storytelling, and eventually in the evolution of intelligence itself. Today, it's easy to take life for granted. We live in controlled environments, with medicine, shelters, food preservation, and warnings for nearly every danger. But the lives of early humans remind us of a time when the simplest choices, a bite of food, a step toward water, a moment of curiosity, could determine life or death. These ancestors, our grandparents, were constantly negotiating the fine line between survival and extinction. Their existence was a testament to resilience, ingenuity, and sometimes sheer luck. The stories of these deaths are not just morbid curiosities. They are reminders of the value of life and the incredible journey humanity has taken. They teach humility, respect for nature, and the importance of cooperation. Every step toward survival was hard-won. Every small victory over danger a triumph. The ease with which so many perished underscores the rarity of life itself and the relentless pressure that shaped human evolution. In the end, the easiest ways to die were often invisible, unexpected, or absurd, yet they shaped who we are today. Our intelligence, our adaptability, and our capacity for empathy and cooperation are all products of a world that sought to eliminate us at every turn. Every misstep, every curiosity-driven mistake, every environmental hazard and microscopic threat contributed to the story of survival. So, when we look at the world now, it's worth remembering how close humanity came to vanishing, not from grand battles or epic encounters, but from simple everyday risks. The fragility of life once defined our ancestors, yet through resilience and adaptation, they paved the way for us. And for that, we owe them more than remembrance. We owe them our very existence. Because in understanding the deaths of those who came before, we appreciate the life we have today, and the extraordinary journey that allowed us to live it.